one of the first major fires that I ever got involved in occurred, believe it or not, 3 days after Christmas in 2017. I've been doing fires for a long time, but this was a major, major fire. It happened in Prospect Avenue in the Bronx. 13 people died, 65 people were injured. So what happens when there's a fire in an apartment? And you got to remember, New York City, as well as probably all major old cities, they have old stock, meaning their apartment buildings are old. I mean, that's what happens. They have old buildings. So there's a child who starts a fire in an apartment on the first floor. The fire is started because the child is able to turn on the stove. We'll come to that and discuss that in a minute. On the stove, the mother had left certain food to be warmed up. It wasn't on. The child was able to turn on the stove. The mother was actually taking a shower. The pot goes on fire. Above the stove are wooden cabinets. Not unusual in apartments in New York City, having wooden cabinets. Not unusual at all. We have buildings that go back 60, 70 years of wooden apartments. I mean, wooden cabinets were the usual. That catches fire. So now the mother comes out of the shower and there's a massive fire in the kitchen. She grabs her child, runs out the door. So there's a law, an administrative code regulation in New York City that requires doors to be self-closing, meaning that the mechanism when you open your door and you go out, that steel door, and these doors are supposed to be steel, closes because of a spring mechanism. If you look on the top of doors, most of us have this air-filled or spring-filled mechanism called the return. The return is meaning the door opens and the door returns. That's why it's called the return. So the door is supposed to close all the way. And why is that? It's a safety mechanism because once that door closes, the fire can be contained within one apartment. So what you learn about fires is that time is of the essence. I know a lot of other things are time of the essence, but think about a fire for a minute. Fire loves oxygen. It loves combustible material. And what happens when it's in an apartment? It spreads. The more time that you can impede that fire from spreading, the better chance you have of the fire department. You know, this to me, firemen are heroes and women. You know, we're taught as children, there's a fire, you run out of the building. These men and women run into the building. So, think about that for a minute. You see a fire and these guys run in and these women run in and they do everything they can to save life. They're heroes. So if the door is closed and it impedes the fire from getting out into the hallway, that's tremendous. That's a lifesaver because once it gets into the hallway, smoke, more combustibles, paint on the wall, all become flammable. Whatever in the hallway, the paint on the wall. But what really kills most people in a fire in an apartment building? It's not fire, it's smoke. Smoke is the number one thing that kills people in apartments, not fire. Most of the time, I'm not going to say that people don't get burnt, they do. But what is a killer is smoke. If you can contain the smoke and the fire in one apartment, I mean, even for a minute, the fire department can get there, knock down the door, or run into it, put the water on the fire, and what they call knock down the fire. The other circumstance is the door remains open. Smoke pours out. Smoke rises. This fire, the main fire, which was on Prospect Avenue in the Bronx, was on the first floor. Smoke gets out and fire gets out into the hallway, goes upstairs. Fire and smoke is now engulfed in the building. Firemen come in, they try to put it out, but now the smoke and the fire has ascended. So the rule was that these doors need to be self-closing for the very reason that it prevents further damage. You're not going to prevent the fire that's already occurring within the apartment. So it's not a preventable thing like with the lithium batteries, because you could try to prevent it. A fire occurs for whatever reason. Someone knocks over a candle. Someone burns stuff on the stove. Whatever. If there's a heater catches fire because you have a blanket next to it. These are all things that can cause fires. So you're not going to prevent the fire within that apartment, but you're going to prevent massive injuries and massive death if that door is self-closing. So New York City required landlords by code to make sure the doors in every apartment within a building self-close. Now, what happens in reality? We'll talk about reality for a minute. You have buildings that are 60 years old. You have spring mechanisms that barely work. You have returns on the door that have become rusted. You have doors that the saddles either raise or the bottom of the door becomes old and warped. What do landlords don't want to do? Landlords don't want to spend money. So instead of fixing it, either the door or the saddle or whatever, the return, they leave it alone. So the doors in most apartments in New York City in 2017 would close halfway, 3/4 of the way. So what happened in Prospect Avenue is the mother runs out of the apartment. The door closes approximately halfway. The fire gets into the hallway and the smoke gets in throughout the entire building. And unfortunately, 13 people died. People were on when the fire department eventually came, they couldn't go out the front door. They had to go by the fire escapes. People were naked on the fire escapes because it happened at 4:00 in the morning. The whole idea for self-closing doors is to prevent further injury and death in the building. Now, unfortunately, prior to 2018, when the building department of the city of New York made an inspection of a building, they went around with a sheet. That sheet listed certain things that they were supposed to check for. They did not have on their sheets, the building inspectors did not have, they had a checklist, a check for checking for self-closing doors. After the Prospect Avenue fire, of which I was the lead counsel on, represented 13 families who died and 65 people who were injured, the city made sure that the building department inspectors had on their checklist to check every building that they went to and check the doors to be self-closing. As a matter of fact, after that fire, I came into my office and made everybody in my office, all my employees, go home and check their doors, including mine. I live in an apartment in New York City. I checked my door. So the whole point behind self-closing doors is to prevent further injury and further fire. Having said that, in 2021, 4 years after the Prospect fire, there's another major fire on 181st Street in the Bronx. Exact same thing happened. Fire, there's actually a heater that started that fire. A father comes in, it's in his little girl's room, sees the fire, grabs his daughter, runs out. The saddle for the door had become warped. The door started to close, wouldn't close all the way. Fire got into the hallway, smoke got into the hallway, and 17 people died. I represent over 100 people from that building fire. So self-closing doors is a very big thing. And the city did at that time do a decent job of telling people to check for self-closing doors. And matter of fact, right after that, there were public service announcements by the fire department that said, if you're in a fire, please make sure to close the door. Now, there's something that's sort of ridiculous about that, because you're in a fire. I mean, just think for a minute. You're in your apartment, there's a fire, you have a child, you grab your child and you're supposed to remember to run out. Oh, I got to go back and close the door? It doesn't happen. It's sort of ridiculous. They should make and do more checks and impose upon the landlord to check every single door in an apartment because as someone who's been involved in over probably 100 fires happen. They just do. And to prevent further damage, that door has to close. So it's incumbent upon the landlord, not upon the person whose apartment is on fire, to say, and remember, hey, I got to go close the door. You want to get out of the apartment. That's what you want to do. You want to save your life. You want to save the life of your family member, not remember to close the door. So while the city has done a better job since 2018, I mean, I'm involved in fires. I'm involved in a fire last week on Valentine Avenue in the Bronx. What happened? Person ran out of the apartment. Door didn't close. Fire got out into the building. 5 people died. I think there's 16 people that are injured, basically from smoke inhalation. The answer is self-closing doors are mandatory in apartment buildings like everywhere in New York City, but it should be incumbent upon the landlord to do it, not upon the tenant.